Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're talking 2 weeks and 1 day ahead of a Brexit referendum, that referendum on whether or not the United Kingdom should remain or not a part of the European Union. To talk about it from the UK capital, David Curtin, London Assembly member for the UKIP party, the UK Independence Party, which is for leaving the European Union. For staying in is European Member of Parliament Claude Moraes of Labour. Thank you for being with us, Strasbourg. And here in the studio, we're in the company of David Gutierrez Perez, EU Research Director for Public Relations Consultants and Pollsters via Voice. We were talking in part one of our discussion about that television show that pitted David Cameron, the Prime Minister, against UKIP's Nigel Farage. The Archbishop of Canterbury launching a scathing attack on the UKIP leader, accusing him of relation to racism for political ends. Justin Wellesby calling inexcusable claims by Farage that staying in the EU could lead to mass sex attacks like those on New Year's Eve in Cologne. Farage telling France 24 he's not a racist. Immigration has to be curbed.
Let me be clear, we've let far too many people in. Way too many people in, and particularly too many unskilled in, and particularly too many unskilled people in, because it's amazing. In the UK last year, we created nearly 500,000 jobs, but 80% of those jobs went to EU citizens. I mean, there is something wrong somewhere with that. Now, you know, there are some that say, well, all British young people are lazy drunks. Well, I don't actually quite believe that, although we may see one or two at the football over the summer, but I just don't quite believe that.
Claude Moraes, is immigration really the hot-button issue?
Immigration is extremely important. Of course it is. Immigration, the economy, I mean, these are extremely important issues in the EU referendum debate. I do want to mention, by the way, when you were talking about young voter registration, it should be taken in the context of the fact that, you know, many young voters in the UK fell off the register and didn't register. So, you know, you must take it in that context. So the Remain camp can't rely on a big surge of young voters. You have to take it in that context. So we're coming up to the kind of numbers that we should have been at a long time ago. So the Remain camp has to, you know, keep campaigning. I just want to mention that. Of course, immigration is extremely important. We have free movement, and free movement has brought huge benefits. People who move freely here, British people who, of course, move in there, hundreds of thousands to Spain, France, other parts of the European Union. It's of mutual benefit. It brings big benefits to the UK. Again, young people, we mentioned huge opportunities across the European Union. But of course, there are costs to migration, we know that. And it's perfectly right that this is debated. It should not be debated in a way that debases the issue, of course, and you talked about that just now. And but yes, absolutely, it should be debated transparently, as should the economy. And when people chuck around phrases like it's scaremongering, well, you know, let's just get the facts out there. And, you know, talking about scaremongering, of course, just delegitimizes anyone's argument, and we shouldn't be doing that. We should just get the facts out, check if the facts are correct, and then move on.
David Curtin, your reaction to the Archbishop of Canterbury saying that Nigel Farage's remarks give a legitimization to racism?
Well, that's absolutely preposterous, honestly. I mean, Nigel Farage, I know him personally. Nothing could be further from the truth. And, you know, to talk about immigration and the legitimate concerns that people have about high levels of immigration into the country is in no way racist or bigoted or xenophobic. And you have had people in the past, you know, famously Gordon Brown, who used to be the leader of the Labour Party, accused a voter in the 2010 election of being a bigot just because she expressed legitimate concerns about immigration. So this whole idea that talking about immigration is racist or is going to give legitimacy to sort of some far-right views is absolutely ridiculous. But people do have legitimate concerns about that, and the levels of immigration to the UK were about 30,000 before 1997. Since then, they've risen dramatically dramatically, and now we have net immigration to Britain of 333,000 this year, and it's increasing all the time. And you see pressure on public services. If you get the tubes in rush hour in London, as I do, you're squeezed in like a sardine. People have concerns about whether they can get their children into primary schools because of the number of people coming from European Union countries in particular needs, of course, to put their children in schools, but we're not building the infrastructure fast enough to cope with open door, rapid mass immigration. So that is a concern that people do have, and it is an issue in the campaign, and it's a good thing to talk about it. It's in no way wrong to talk about that.
So you're suggesting that, infrastructure has to be updated before we can let in more immigrants, that otherwise you have to wait until mass transit in London can cope?
Well, I mean, it's just basically common sense. I mean, let's take London as an example, and the population of London has increased by 2 million people over the last 25 years, and that increase is almost entirely due to immigration. The number of British-born people in London has stayed the same at 5.2 million. The number of foreign-born people in London has risen from 1.5 to 3.5 million people. So with that increase in population, of course, you need to build more infrastructure. You need to build more schools. You need to build more houses, homes for people to live in. You need to expand the transport system and network to be able to cope with that. And that just simply hasn't happened. And so we've been really taken by surprise. Well, you might say by surprise, but by opening the doors, particularly to the E8 countries, when Poland and so on joined and had free movement of labour. And people from the eastern countries to come to Britain. Of course, fantastic that some people brought skills with them, but that really we didn't have any planning to build more homes and to build more infrastructure, schools, GP surgeries, hospitals to cope with that. And now people are finding it difficult, and quality of life in London and around the United Kingdom is suffering for many people, and as a direct result of the huge increase in immigration that we've seen.
Let me ask Didac Gudez-Perez, what's your research?
I think it's very tricky, that point, because when we have the numbers, this geography politics, it's very tricky when you see the number of British citizens living or enjoying some kinds of benefits in other countries,
France and Spain.
Like France and Spain. So I think it's really tricky to use this kind of argument or geographical argument, because there's always a return or a win or a benefit when you interact with other nations, I think, in Europe. But I think that to return to the question about immigration and what are the salient issues here, I think that the question should be not only about the topics in itself, but what is the right scale, administrative and political scale, to solve or to better solve these problems. So I think that both camps have to come with an argument, with a solid argument, why it's better to solve immigration or to act regarding immigration at the local scale or at the national scale, and why it's better to act on the European scale. And I think that both camps here have a lot to say. I mean, it's definitely some of these topics are common to several countries in Europe. So I don't see why we shouldn't be talking more about what is the level, the political level, to solve these kind of problems, not only about the problem.
All right. This issue of immigration is one thing. Of course, there's the broader issue, which is that of sovereignty and how much power you give to states, how much power you give to Brussels. Boris Johnson, the former mayor of London, a Tory, headlining the Leave campaign, defending Brexit as a matter of sovereignty and, as he puts it, democracy.
So I think they can see that on the democratic side of the argument, they are losing. But what they say is that sacrifice of democracy is worth it for the economic gain. And what I want to say to you today is that argument is morally and practically completely wrong.
All right, before I ask Claude Moraes about that, just, Claude, it's interesting, and Didac was mentioning it in part one of our discussion, citizens of other EU nations agreeing more and more And according to that Pew survey he talked about, 42% of citizens across the continent are for more power for national governments, only 19% in favor of more power for Brussels. There seems to be this just sort of general feeling that too much power is in the EU.
Well, there's certainly a feeling about that. First of all, there's the facts, and secondly, there is an issue about sharing sovereignty. He said it was completely wrong, I think Boris Johnson said. Well, we share sovereignty all the time. We share it with NATO, we share it with international organisations. I mean, that's our defence capability, the safety of our country. We share that with other countries. I mean, there are many instances of that. But yes, the EU is a big example of shared sovereignty. But the issue about control, I mean, we elect representatives to make decisions, including, by the way, UKIP representatives who are here with me now. Nigel Farage is here with me now in Strasbourg, elected by UKIP to make decisions here equally with the Council, with the Commission. So, you know, much of this is misrepresented. Not as it's misrepresented in Britain. In other countries, there's a more accurate assessment of how we make decisions in the European Union, where, you know, Britain is a big player here. I mean, you have, for example, Europol headed by a British police officer. You have so many elements. I'm chair of a major committee here. I mean, there are so many British elected politicians doing a job here, being accountable. I mean, there are so many aspects of this that are not well reported. One of the good things about the referendum debate is the ability to try and communicate this back. Boris Johnson, of course, is pursuing that populist argument, and of course it sounds good, and it sounds good in a country where we've not debated this enough, and I'm glad we're debating it now, so that people can see what it means to share sovereignty where it matters. But of course we should have national power where it matters, and that's in most areas of our lives. And that's as it should be. We should only be making laws cross-border where it's relevant to do so, and not in areas where we should be making national laws or at local level. That's a fact. And I think I just want to just quickly say about the immigration debate. I mean, there are more French nationals in London than you can shake a stick at, and they are contributing to the NHS here, to the economy through their tax. They are less likely to claim benefits, and they are less likely to claim in-work benefits than others in our city in London. So I just want to make that point. There are many, many benefits of free movement, as well as all the negatives that you hear day in, day out in the British press.
David Curtin, what happens if it's yes to Brexit? Do you kick out all those French people that are in London?
Absolutely not. You know, and I think everyone's made it clear that everyone who is living in the United Kingdom already, who is here legally, is welcome to stay and will stay. And no one has ever said that immigration is a bad thing. It is a fantastically good thing if it's done well and if it's controlled. But if it's not controlled and it's risen tenfold over the last 20 years or so, then
and how about to Claude Moraes' point that immigrants, and surveys show it time and again, the OECD has came up with one showing that immigrants give in more than they take out when it comes to contributing to the economy.
Well, we do have surveys that show that you know, for some groups of immigrants, then pay taxes and contribute that way, and give more tax than take out in welfare. But that doesn't include costs of healthcare. It doesn't include costs of education. It doesn't include the extra costs of extra infrastructure, spending on transport, spending on police, etc. That you need those services as well. So on balance, there is a net deficit, but of course, you know, it's fantastic when we do have people coming from all over the world to the United Kingdom to contribute, to work, to bring different ideas, and to work in the NHS, to work in financial services, to work in the tech industry. And I think what would be good as well is that if we have an equal playing field for EU citizens and non-EU citizens, so that everyone from all over the world was on an equal footing to come and gain work visas to come to the United Kingdom, and we can't do that at the moment because we are in the European Union. If I could answer, just a couple of other points about sovereignty there. I mean, we mentioned that, let's look. When Britain joined the European Union in the 1970s, it was presented to the British people that we were joining a common market, and that's what everyone thought was happening. But then since then, we've had, the Treaty of Amsterdam, of Nice, of Maastricht, the Lisbon Treaty, and step by step, the European Commission, Parliament, and Council has got more and more power, and now it makes 55% approximately of our laws through the directives and regulations and case law. Coming from the European Court of Justice.
That's a wrong figure.
And so that is and something that people are very, very
concerned about. That's a wrong figure.
That is the right figure when we take into account the directives, the regulations and decisions and the case law coming from the European Court of Justice. And it is something that people are very, very concerned about because it was never presented to people in the 70s, and now we have that situation. And I think people don't in this country generally want to have a commission which is unelected making all those laws, the council in which we have one member out of 27.
Make all the laws.
The
Commission initiates laws. The Commission initiates laws.
We have 12% representation on the Council
the Council of Europe is not in the European Union.
We cannot have any control over the other 27 members, and we elect 70 odd members out of a parliament of 700. So we simply cannot have power over the whole of the European Parliament. So if something happens, the commissioners, the other members of the Council of Ministers, the other members of the European Parliament who aren't from this country decide, we simply cannot overrule that. And I think that is the issue of sovereignty that people in this country are very, very concerned about.
Claude Moraes?
The House of Commons Library have made it very clear that over 50% of UK laws are not made via the European Union apparatus. And I don't know why this is, well, I do know why it's continually repeated, but it shouldn't be. And you can check just by going to the internet exactly how many laws are made by the European Union apparatus. And, I've said very clearly that when the European Union laws are made, they are made with British members of the European Parliament and the British government involved in making those laws. And wherever possible within that institutional framework, British trade unions, businesses, small businesses involved in that whole process. And all of that discussion is completely ignored when we make these cliched statements about how laws are made. The Commission makes laws. The Commission doesn't make laws. It initiates proposals. And the laws are made by British people, by MEPs that you dismiss, some of which, of course, are UKIP. But, that's what we're elected to do. And, of course, this might not matter when we make all these cliched statements. But, you bandy around these figures and then we wonder why people get sick and fed up of this thing called the EU. And that's what we're fighting against. We're fighting against these cliches. And then you make glib statements about, well, this huge number of French nationals, the biggest number, by the way, from one country to another here in the UK, they're making a huge contribution. The settled community here in the UK are not anywhere near as likely to claim in-work benefits and other benefits. But when they pay their taxes at very high levels, particularly the French community working in the city and other services, what they're doing is they're paying for the NHS, they're paying more than their contribution, but that should be stated, because that is helping the United Kingdom and our services and our infrastructure. And immigrants are helping the NHS. And we have got hundreds of thousands of migrants and immigrants, British ones, in France, in Germany, in Spain, in Belgium, and they are currently voting in this election. So, we have to be really clear about the facts. But of course, they're very inconvenient for the Leave campaign. But I hope those people are voting, and I hope that some people are getting those facts. Because in the real world, that has in the end what matters.
Let me bring in Didac Gutierrez-Perez on this, because the debate we're hearing between Claude there and David about sovereignty, it's playing out in a lot of places across the European Union. That survey that we were mentioning earlier, after a brief respite when the Eurozone crisis receded, we're seeing that the overall EU's popularity here on the continent is again starting to go down in places like France, where the far-right National Front has the wind in its sails. But also, it seems as though this issue of sovereignty is playing out all the time. In Britain, there's that talk we heard of another Scotland referendum if there is a Brexit. In Spain, Catalonia, in other places as well, the rise of regionalist parties. The issue of who has sovereignty over what seems to be growing.
Yes, indeed. But I think there are two interpretations to, for example, the Pew Research Center, and it's. I think we are used to get figures very high regarding EU popularity in the continent, and it's not necessarily a bad thing to get people having different opinions, or to having a demand regarding how the EU works. So I think it's not necessarily because there's a criticism that there's just less people believing in what Europe or even the project is doing. So there are two ways of looking at it. I mean, we have for 40 years, 50 years in some countries just unstopped permanent support to the EU. This is not normal. This is something that happens when sometimes you don't even discuss the issue. So I think that people are starting to discuss more about the European Union. It's not necessarily a bad thing that figures get more and more equal against between each side.
And is this unpopularity due to things like the refugee crisis? Is it down to the fact that, well, decades of social democracy with the same old parties doing coalitions in lots of countries, it gets a little tiring after a while?
Well, the qualitative study of the same Pew Research Center publication shows that there's a multitude of elements going on, and it might be just that we are living maybe a deep crisis, even more systemic than we think, and we have discussed this before about the politics, how politics even in some countries work, how the main parties evolve, how they integrate new demands and new population needs. So I think there are different elements that when you put this together, you might believe that it's against the EU or that the EU is the root there, but maybe there are several roots there.
All right, a lot more discussion of what it means to be in the European Union coming up in the next 2 weeks and 1 day. Didac Gutierrez-Perez, I want to thank you. I want to thank Claude Moraes for being with us from Strasbourg. And David Curtin in London, thank you for joining us. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there. Yes, I've been taking a look at obviously what's being said online and in the media today with regards to Brexit. And obviously that last-minute dash for people to register to vote has got a lot of attention. More than 500,000 people tried to get online yesterday.
Now, I saw conflicting figures because some people were saying they were trying to register, and others saying they were just trying to check in to see if they were registered.
Ah, OK. Well, according to this, and it does seem to be from some fairly extensive research, it was more than 500,000 people who actually registered yesterday. Wow. Unsurprisingly, it caused the website to crash, hence this extension to the ability to register for another day. And perhaps it's to do with the fact that this is such a tight race. The latest YouGov poll has the Remain camp on 43%, the Leave camp 42%. So people really starting to believe, I think, that every vote is going to count. Now, if we take a look at this article from Reuters, gives us a bit more data on this one too. They say that one area where the Leave campaign is romping ahead is the number of mentions it gets on Twitter. It's actually twice mentioned twice as often as the Remain campaign. It compares 400,000 tweets for Remain to 800,000. This is in the last 2 months for the Leave campaign. That's a big, big, sizable difference.
Didac, is that a sign?
Yeah, sometimes it's harder to conduct a positive campaign, and the Remain campaign are just conducting a positive campaign. So it might be one of the reasons behind the less successful, let's say.
And how reliable are these polls? Since I know a lot of them rely on telephoning.
Yes, well, you know, polls are always polls, so it's very complicated to rely more than just the polls is just a photography at the right moment, and sometimes just at a specific place. It's not the perfect trend of what will happen.
Well, what Brandwatch has been doing, they are observers of social media activity. They've been looking at all of the tweets over the last 2 months. And it's interesting to note some of the figures they've come up with. There have been 5.4 million mentions of Brexit in the last 2 months, 4 million of those in just the last month. So it really is gathering pace. And they say that its volume's rarely seen in the United Kingdom. Rarely does the UK get quite so animated about these things. The topics most often discussed are the economy and immigration, so that really appears to be the focus. As for last night's debate, it's interesting to see who's come out with statements on who did best. Unsurprisingly, The Express, which is very much in the UKIP camp, the Eurosceptic camp, they said that Nigel Farage had done a more convincing job. They claim to be able to back that up with some polls saying that some swing voters came down on the side now of actually Leave